and welcome to the Hero Report podcast. My name is Ari Cohen. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Nebraska. With me, as always, is Matt Langdon of the Hero Construction Company in Michigan. How are you, Matt?
I am well, thanks.
I'm glad to see you. You got your headphones in because we were getting some interesting feedback from your laptop. But I think we've conquered our problems and we're ready to go. We have an important topic today on the Hero Report. It's one that I have, I think we maybe talked about in passing in the past, but today we'll spend a few minutes on it. That is, of course, the topic of heroic animals. It is a personal favorite topic of mine. We're going to see if I didn't even say it and you already lost. I was going to say we'll see if we can make it 10 minutes without laughing, but you started laughing immediately. So how are you, Matt, first of all?
I'm well.
Good.
Lots of work going into the Hero Conference lately, so it's good. It's good times.
Good. Well, we'll take your mind off of the Hero Roundtable Conference for about, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 if we can get that much, and then we'll actually smoothly transition into the conference because, of course, there's a lot to say about it, and in fact, it's really what we want to talk about today. That is what doing all the planning for the conference has done for you. That is what sorts of conversations you're having about heroism and so on. So, but first of all, we keep talking about this back and forth. We do, for people who don't know, here's some behind-the-scenes information. We do a little pre-podcast talk before we start, and of course we talk throughout the week via email and text message and Facebook about a variety of topics, some related to the Hero Report, some just because we are sitting in front of a computer and think something is funny, and more often than not, in the last 2 weeks, I'd say, we've been talking about heroic animals because I find the topic to be hilarious. I don't know how else to say this. I'm going to go ahead, unpopular opinion alert. I don't think animals can be heroic. I think that animals are great. I think that pets are lovely. I'm a dog person, not a cat person. Grew up with dogs all my life. And I don't think that animals are heroes for a variety of reasons. But Matt, maybe you'll tell me that you think all animals have the capacity for heroism. What do you think?
I don't know that I've arrived at a conclusion necessarily. The topic came up very early on in my writing from readers of the Hero Construction Company blog early on, and it comes back to definitions of heroism again. I think a lot of it. There's a very famous horse in Australia called Phar who was one of those, uniters of the people kind of horses racing against great odds and et cetera, et cetera. He had the benefit of having very strong suspicions that the Americans had assassinated him when he came to America to beat all of the American horses. So he had a great story, and he's considered.
I'm sorry. Wait. I'm sorry. Clarification. Question of clarification. This horse was assassinated?
He came to America
of course, as horses do.
Right, to win everything here, and he was, and this is the popular story. The realities, I couldn't tell you exactly, but he came to America and was killed by the mob, because the mob doesn't want some outsider Australian horse coming and winning all the races, which was kind of the story of Phar life. Was this
the mob doesn't want? Okay, right. No, that makes no sense at all.
I'll send you. I'll send you some links.
Please. But wait. Now, just a minute. So it's a nice story because it's a very successful hometown horse. who unites the people and who then gets whacked. But what does the horse do that's heroic?
Right. Well, it comes back to this idea. Maybe he's the Achilles style hero, right?
Oh, yes.
The,
No, sure.
the achievement style hero, and
Yeah.
that's it's that. I mean, jumping on the back of successful, wildly successful beyond these people that redefine a sport or science or whatever it might be. They're regarded as the heroes of that sport. So that's the piece that I think that's where we get into definition issues, and we live in a society where hero is acceptable in a couple of different frames, I think, and one of them is that idea of the idol of the person or the animal in this case inspires greatness or whatever it might be. So that was the argument that went with Phar Lap and other such animals. There's a lot of stories of war animals and that sort of thing, and I know America's got some famous horses that weren't as good as Phar Lap, but were obviously
Watch
good.
out now.
So that's the first part, I think.
Okay, so this is good because this is a kind of heroism that we don't often talk about. We end up talking about other regarding heroism, as I call it, much more often, right? And this is the heroism that we see people talking about with dogs, right? That this dog saved my life, or this dog jumped into the pond and pulled out the baby, or whatever, right?
Right.
That's the other regarding canine heroism that we tend to hear a lot about in the news. It's a very popular news item. Hero dog wakes family when house burns. But what you're talking about is something quite different. That is an animal that's truly excellent, right? And people would say, look, LeBron James similarly is an animal who is distinctly excellent, right? It happens to be a human animal, but nonetheless, right? Very, very good at doing what he does. Now, I don't buy it. I don't think this is heroism like Achilles, and I'll tell you why. The central point of the Iliad, or maybe let's say there are two central points to the story of the Iliad, and they revolve around the idea of mortality and the idea of principle, right? So Achilles has to make a choice. He is singularly excellent, right? He is the best of the warriors, but he has to choose to go to war, right? He has to choose to fight, and he knows that if he does fight, he'll die. Yeah. So he has to consciously say, I'm going to do this thing that I'm the best at. I'm not going to go home as I said I would, even though it means an untimely death. Yeah, his untimely death is bound up with his heroism. Yeah, he can't be a hero without embracing his mortality. Yeah, now you may say like precisely like Phar Lap, right? Because Phar Lap knows in his horsey, is it a he? Is Phar Lap a he? In his horsey mind, that the mob, if he comes to America, the mob has already issued threats, right? The mob has said, you're welcome to come, but you won't get home, right? And
Exactly right.
Now, if that was true, then Phar Lap is Achilles. Except there's also then that second thing, which is principle, right? The reason that Achilles ultimately makes this decision is in some sense because of his dedication to an idea, right? A certain warrior code or ethic that he had previously rejected, right? You might say it's bound up with justice, at least their conception of justice in that time, or you might just say it's part of the sort of communal norms that Achilles chooses to fight for. Yeah. The horse doesn't have communal norms. The horse doesn't have a sense of justice, at least not in the way that we understand horses. right? I don't want to cut off this discussion by saying it's never the case that an animal can behave heroically, yeah, because we don't know, right? There's just so much about animals we don't know. There may be a time when we say, we have a better understanding, we have a better window into the minds of certain kinds of animals, and now we know that they have this intentionality, they have this way of thinking about the future, and planning and making serious choices about their long-term good versus their short-term dedication to principle. In which case, I'm perfectly happy to have this conversation again and say, oh, back then I didn't know anything about the science of horse brains, but now that we do, I changed my mind, right? I think this is what people ought to be saying, for example, with dolphins, right? We know a lot more about how dolphins work, how their brains work, and so we might say that there's a possibility for what is it, cetacean heroism, but I don't think we have any reason to believe that about far lap.
So, going back to Achilles, you gave some general descriptions of his heroic title there, but also some very specific things. So when you're talking about that style of heroism, who else fits? Who are some of the other people that fit? Because I think the specifics you gave of him knowing that he was going to die eliminates a lot of people, I think, right?
No, actually, that's everybody. We're all going to die, right? That's what's so great about it. We're all going to die, but most of us, I tell this to my students all the time, it's the most jarring thing that I say in class, and I like to say it as often as I can. We're dying right now, right? We're in the process of dying, but we don't act like it, yeah? And we don't think about it. And I think that's the distinction. One doesn't have to have the precise either-or choice that Achilles has, but the thing that's important to remember about Achilles is that he'll die too. It's just a question of whether he'll die now or die later, whether he'll die as a hero or just a guy who lived out his life comfortably back at home. Everybody dies. It's just a question of whether you really sort of come to terms with your mortality or you don't, right? And people who don't come to terms with their mortality in a serious way, those I would say are people who are not prepared to make heroic choices. Right? Those are people who are far more willing to sell out on the principle that they might have held dear in order to sort of bargain for a little more time on Earth.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the other part, I think, is you said, people can make those choices, people understand, and we don't know the horses necessarily do. But I think in the case of Achilles, he's a fictional character. So it's us that are ascribing those decisions to him, just as humans can ascribe these feelings to the horse. And but by no means am I saying that it's the same thing, but I think there's a cultural piece there. And the thing that I didn't mention with Phar Lap is that he represented the Australian spirit, I guess, of being underdogs, of fighting against the man, that kind of thing. Because he was this horse that shouldn't have been successful, and he just kept winning, and they kept adding weight to him. He shouldn't have won. He shouldn't have even been able to run, and then he won, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's this ascribing of the story to, or using his story to illustrate something cultural.
Sure. Now, I mean, so a couple of things. First of all, he doesn't know that, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. He doesn't know that Phar Lap doesn't know that he embodies the Australian cultural ethos. I think that seems to me fairly critical, right? He is a horse, and one thing horses do is run, and I think that when put in a position to run and encouraged to do it, that's what a horse is going to do. I suppose some horses will just stand there,
Something
right?
that's after working. I worked a long time with horses. I can tell you that that is not the case.
Right.
A lot of horses will not run even when you want them to run.
Right. And those horses are not
And not
race horses,
heroes. Right.
right? They're not race horses. That's we have them do other things.
True.
But the thing is, there's no. I just don't know if there's any agency for a horse, right? And it is true that Achilles is fictional, but we know tons of non-fictional people
Yeah.
who have the kind of intentionality or agency that I'm talking about, right? Who make real choices when they say I could do this or I could do that. It would be safer for me to do X, but my principles say I have to do Y. So I'm going to do Y, even though it's very, very dangerous, and even though I know that my time on this earth is finite. Do horses know that they're going to die?
Right, exactly. That's very true. But it comes back to us putting those thoughts into the animal, just as we put the thoughts into a demigod, right?
Yeah,
we don't
but
know how demigods think either.
sure, but we do know how other people think.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Oh, and that's
And that's why Achilles works as a character, right? That's why people still read the Iliad after these thousands of years. That there's something about the characters of Hector, who Hector is the same, right? Hector knows he's going to die. His mistake is sometimes thinking he won't. There's a reason people identify with these characters. No one identifies. You don't identify with a horse, right? You might say this horse he stands for what we stand for, but no one says, man, I wish I could be a horse like that.
No, but they do. And you said at the start that you're a dog lover, which I'm yet to believe. But dog lovers ascribe human feelings to their dogs. They see personality. They see, and none of this. I mean, scientifically, I don't believe we know that any of this is true, and in fact, say that it isn't true. The same goes for horses. I could describe to you the personalities of all the horses I worked with in my first summer at camp. And it's because we're human putting these onto the horses, and we identify with certain traits in the horses that we're seeing. So people identify with the fighting spirit that we assumed or we put onto Phar Lap.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that Phar Lap had a fighting spirit, right?
No, right.
It just means that we would like him to have a fighting spirit because it makes it more. Look, I'm not interested in watching a horse run around in a circle, right? That doesn't interest me at all. But if I tell myself a story about how hard it is for that horse, and how that horse is overcoming all sorts of obstacles and challenges, maybe I'm more interested, right? So it's for me. It's not. I mean, the horse is not doing anything heroic. I'm doing all the work here, right?
Right.
And I think that distinction with human beings, whether or not I ascribe some kind of agency or intentionality to a certain person, that person still has that agency and intentionality.
Right. So, okay, what about, I assume with kids you've seen Toy Story.
Sure.
Okay, so there's heroism.
Long before I had kids.
Right. There's heroism involved in Toy Story, right? Or no? Are you saying there's no heroism because there's no humans in Toy Story?
I mean,
I get that Phar Lap is real and the characters in the story are fictional, but they're both stories, regardless, right?
So, I mean, the author of Toy Story, the person who wrote that script, created characters that have human behaviors, right? If the toys were just toys and Andy was doing all the work, then there's no heroism. But they're not just toys. They're real. Human beings don't know this about their toys, right? That's the conceit. Human beings don't know that, in fact, toys are agents in the same way that human beings are. That's what makes the possibility for heroism exist. right? Now, the same, as I say, the same may be true about horses. Human beings might not know that horses are agents in the same way that people are. Yeah, but until we know, until I see Toy Story for horses, Horse Story, I can't assume that the thing that I would like to be the case is actually the case.
Okay. So there's no, but do you think there's a, can you describe Phar Lap as a cultural hero? You can't do that because
I can describe him as a cultural icon.
Yep.
I can describe him as no, that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use that word. He's a cultural icon. He's not a role model. He's not. I mean, he's you know. Can you imagine? He's a role model for other horses. Other horses say, "I wish I was like Phar Lap." That's the thing, right? It's not a thing. So you know, here's what would be interesting, right? If an animal that wasn't made to run fast in a circle started doing it, right, and excelled at it, then we would say, like, isn't there a movie about a snail now, Turbo? Isn't that a movie that's coming out? We'll have to review it for heroism, because I think it's about how a snail, you know, accomplishes great things at the racetrack. You know, then we'd really have something, right? Right? If a cat started racing greyhounds and winning, then we'd say, man, look at that. That is a singularly excellent cat.
But still not a hero, right?
I mean, you'd have to talk to the cat about why it is why that cat made the decision. The cat said, I'm going to race these dogs. It's very dangerous for me. But I'm going to race them, and I'm going to win because I am the best racer. Not letting my catly limitations slow me down.
Okay, so
but this is quite different. This is quite different from other regarding heroism that we see in animals, right? You know, a dog rescues family, and so maybe we can talk about that for 5 minutes before we leave off this weird subject. But I do think this subject is getting me to say more things about you know, what I think is actually heroic and why. So
and it took an Australian horse example, I think.
It's a good horse
to make it happen. He was the best horse.
Did he save children?
I mean, there's probably some stories about that.
I hope so. That's why the mob took him out. He was working in an orphanage, saving children, and yeah.
He certainly saved a lot of people from the misery of poverty. That's part of the story. And you've got a horse. There's a horse that did that in America, right?
Wait, stop it. What do you mean he saved people from? He put money in their pockets?
No, he got them to be thinking about something else.
He distributed gifts to them at the holidays. He did not save them from poverty. They didn't have
them from thinking about their poverty.
But it didn't change. I'm sorry. I mean, great. It's a diversion, right? But so is True Blood on HBO, right? True Blood is a hero for saving people from the morass. It's not. It's a diversion. He's not.
Yeah.
He's not consciously doing it, and he's not actually affecting their material situation.
Well, if they bet on him, he was. So going back to dogs that save people, because I think it tends to be the dogs, and I think that's part of your argument against dogs as heroes.
It is, in fact.
That's the story that we see a lot. And you said dogs saving family, and that tends to be the common thread as well.
Yes.
So let me let you just leap into dogs, and then I'll use the example that I used on you a week or so ago that you had absolutely no answer for.
I don't even remember it, so we'll see. I bet I haven't gotten any better since then. Here is what people say, right? Our house was on fire in the middle of the night, and the dog barked and woke us all up, and that helped us get out of the house in time. What else is the dog going to do? What's the alternative? What's the alternative? The dog is locked in the house with the people.
Ah, right, okay.
Most of the time, the dog is locked in the house with the people. The dog would like to live. How does a dog get out of the house? When the house is on fire, the dog gets out of the house the same way as when the house isn't on fire. He barks to get the attention of the people who open doors, right? A dog is attempting to survive here, right? And so the family also has to survive, right? Now that's if I give no credit to the dog, right? But if I give some credit to the dog, I could say dogs do this, right? This is part of what we made dogs, right? Like, I mean, dogs used to be wolves, and wolves didn't save people, right? I mean, I don't know. Maybe someone's gonna listen to this, and they're gonna go do some research, and they're gonna find 100 stories of wolves that save people. But I haven't read any, and so at this point, I'm gonna charge ahead as though I'm 100% right. Wolves eat people sometimes, right? Dogs, not so much. How did that change happen?
Not as often.
A lot of years of domestication and breeding, right? That's generally what happened. We made dogs so they would do certain things, and one of those things is protect us, right? So, in fact, it's like hardwired into being a dog that if the person you're supposed to protect needs your protection, you protect them. That's what you do. That's why dogs bark at strangers. That's why dogs bare their teeth, and so on, right? That's why sometimes you have to make sure that when you bring a new baby home from the hospital, you got to introduce it to the dog and say, you know, this was one of us and not a strange thing you should eat or whatever. I mean, you know, that's dogs, man. That's dogs. So in some sense, like this is a kind of what did I call it in our email? A kind of kin altruism, right? The dog is part of our family. It's designed to think of itself as one of us, one of our immediates. And it should protect us in the same way that it protects its children or whatever, right? And some of that is simply the result of our good work, and some of that is a result of a dog knowing what's good for the dog, right? You know, not biting the hand that feeds it, and so on, right? You take care of those who are good to you.
So. Right, and we have the same conversations about humans helping their family.
Absolutely.
That's the expectation. That's not the exception. Right. It's not heroism to do what is essentially your job and what you're hardwired to do.
If my house is on fire, I'm going to pick up my kids and take them out. I'm not going to assume they're going to fend for themselves or just run out on my own. I'm not going to do it. Right? That's crazy. That's not heroic.
Yeah.
That's being a parent.
Right. So it's something that's bred. It's something that's genetic. It's what dogs do. So the video that I showed you that went viral a few years ago of the dog in, I think, Argentina, who ran across the highway and rescued a dog that had been hit. Your claim is it's probably family, right? So it discredits the rescue.
I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know anything about it. I tried to do a little bit of research on that dog who went and got another dog off of the interstate or whatever it was. We don't know anything about those dogs, right? I mean, maybe those two dogs actually, have been living together in a dog domestic partnership for a decade. We really don't know, right? Now, it could if it is the case that these dogs have nothing to do with one another, right? They've never seen the savior dog had never seen injured dog before that moment. Then that's something very interesting, and it ought to be studied, right? We ought to find out what's going on there if we can. We ought to try to reproduce this somehow in lab conditions or whatever to see what's happening with that dog, because that's really something. But we just don't know. Like maybe I'm sure what people want to suggest is that this dog saw another dog and said, "I have to rescue that other dog," right? And if so, that's like a person coming across a stranger and saying, "I have to rescue that stranger." Yeah. If that's the case, that's very unique. I've never seen anything like it, and I suspect most people haven't seen anything like it either, right?
Well, that's where I would argue. I think is I think people don't think that that's abnormal. I think that real dog lovers, not people who just say they're dog lovers at the start of the podcast to get people on their side, would say that that's what dogs do. They help when they see a need. Well, you know, good dogs that have been well trained, or you know, that sort of thing.
But weren't these like dogs that were just sort of kind of living in the wild?
Yeah, that's one of the potential answers is that they were definitely feral dogs, but one of the answers is that this dog was just getting the other dog as food.
Right.
Whether that's, I mean,
that would be a negative for your side.
Right.
But I think if that's not heroic.
Right. Unless it was providing food for a dying dog that had never met before.
That's the other thing, right? We didn't see what happened. It was like a 10-second video clip or whatever,
yeah.
20-second video clip. We didn't see what happened after, right? Maybe they turned off the cameras because the hero dog started, you know, enjoying the victim.
One thing that stood out in that was that the rescue dog was kind of holding the other dog in its paws and walking, like, not walking backwards, but kind of shuffling backwards with its front legs, shoulders essentially on the ground. It was a weird way for a dog to get food, I would imagine.
Maybe. I mean, it's. You know, I mean, there's so many things. It's such a hard case to talk about, right? We also don't know if it was a person dressed up as a dog. I mean, there's a million possibilities here. But what I'll say is the suggestion that dogs will always help other dogs is obviously wrong.
Right.
Right? I mean, we see very well-trained dogs just attacking other dogs. Like,
yeah.
For no reason. Like at the park, two dogs that are very well trained, if they're let off a leash, they just go after one another, right? Sometimes the dogs will sniff one another and become friends, and sometimes they'll bare their teeth and start going after the other dog. So it's not just a thing that dogs do, right?
No, right, and I mean, some allegedly well-trained dogs will attack people too. I mean, it goes back to us ascribing human traits to animals.
Right. And the truth is, like, as much as we have succeeded in domesticating dogs and making them our pets, they are still animals, and we don't have perfect control over them. Right? I mean, in the same way that other human beings are still animals and we don't have any control over them. But this doesn't mean that they have a kind of intentionality, right? When a dog attacks a child, I don't think the dog says to him or herself, today I'm going to attack a child, right? I have a range of choices. I could dig up the garden. I could take a nap. I could attack children, right? And today I choose attack children. Right? I think something just goes a little haywire in that dog's head. You know, the dog shouldn't attack the children, but the dog does, and then the dog most often gets put down, and that's not the dog embracing his mortality, right? I think dogs don't have any sense of their own mortality. I mean, at least from what I've seen, and again, we had a lot of dogs when I was a child. We always had a dog in the house, and those dogs, you know, they got sick and they had to be put to sleep, and it was very traumatic for us, but not for them, right? Because the dog, when you take the dog to the vet, the dog has no idea what's coming.
Right.
Right? Even if you said to the dog, even if the dog knew we always go this way to go to the vet, the dog still is not saying, I'm sick and I'm going to die. Right? I don't know. Even when you don't take a dog to the vet and the dog is sick at home and dies, people say, oh, you know, I looked in my dog's eye and I knew that we had this understanding or whatever. I just think that's one-sided. You know, I don't think it's bad. I think that human beings really like that close companionship. I think that there are lots of virtues to having dogs in our lives, but I think that we're trying to make more of that relationship than perhaps there is. I think dogs are great. I think that they, you know, they teach us a lot about ourselves, and they really are. I mean, you know, a good dog is a real source of of unconditional love and teaches great responsibility and all sorts of things like that. But I think that we go too far in saying, here are a series of intentions that my dog had today.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I've got one more animal that I want to go to, but I want to go back to Phar Lap for a minute just to point out what an amazing horse he was. He's rated number 20.
You looked this up while we were talking.
Yeah. Because I don't think you quite understood how great this horse was. He's ranked the number 22 all-time racehorse in the U.S. and yet never raced in the U.S. So
that means there are 21 better horses.
No. He's rated number 22 in the top 100 U.S. racehorses. So he's so good that even though he wasn't a U.S. racehorse, he's ranked number 22. It's an amazing thing. That'd be like me being rated the number 22 person of all time in France, the French people.
But you've never been there.
Well, I've been there, but I never claimed to be French. I never raced as a French person.
I see. So this is a list of American racehorses?
Top 100 U.S. racehorses, and he's ranked number 22.
I see. So the list is meaningless because it's not a list of American racehorses. It's a list of international racehorses, and he's number 22, and all of the others happen to be American.
No. It's the top 100 U.S. racehorses.
Well, that's insane.
It is.
That horse is not an American racehorse.
Right, but they had to put him on there because he's so incredibly good.
I can't wait until we get to sit down in person because I think that these conversations will be improved immeasurably by being in person.
I think so too.
Look, this is a great horse. It's really good at running. I cannot dispute that. Just like I cannot dispute the obvious reasons for the mafia wanting to kill a horse that was good at racing instead of simply betting on that good racehorse. But anyway.
Well, because he didn't lose. That's the problem. You can't take bets on other horses when one horse is the only one that's going to win.
So this horse never lost?
He lost a couple of times early on.
Well then, yeah, no.
Early on.
So what we're saying is, it could lose.
Well, I mean, theoretically, it once lost.
Okay.
But yeah. So going back to another animal. Right. So we've talked about dogs rescuing people and that they were bred to do so, so they're discredited. What about dolphins?
Yeah.
The dolphins rescue people.
Yeah.
And there's many cases of this, discussions of this, but they clearly have not been.
No, dolphins are an entirely different story. I picked dolphins early on with a purpose. I wouldn't pick just any animal, right? It's not like saying, well, guinea pigs are really something. You never know what they'll do. Dolphins, I think that there's still a lot that we have to learn about them. But I'm perfectly willing to say that dolphins have a life of the mind that is much more like human beings than like dogs or horses or whatever, right? I think that we've started to really figure that out, and to they have a real sort of sense of themselves, right? And I think that it's that sense of oneself and a kind of intentionality that we're looking for, right? There was that movie Up. Do you remember Up?
Yeah. With
the dog that had was it a special collar so that we could understand what it was thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was funny, right? It was funny why was it funny?
Because he was saying funny things.
And because he would start he would start thinking something and then immediately think of like a squirrel, right? And then go run off and do that. There was no sort of I mean, first of all, it was funny because we don't think dogs think like that, right? That was number one. And number two, it was funny because there was no rhyme or reason to the thing. Whatever popped into the animal's brain, the animal was interested in, right? The suggestion is that's not the same with dolphins, right? That in fact they're capable of planning. Yeah, the dog in Up, for all the humanity we ascribe to it, was not a planner, right? And I think that's a distinction there. If you can't make a plan, um, then you're just acting on instinct.
Right.
There's nothing wrong. I think this is really important for me to say. There's nothing wrong with acting on instinct, right? Um, you know, uh, and in fact, you might do something that saves a life, right, or that's really impressive instinctually, yeah. Um, but I think that there's a real difference between acting on instinct and choosing to do something.
Right. Right. So you can see the potential for heroism in dolphins because of where things are going.
I can see the potential for rights in dolphins. I go that far.
Right. Right. Got it.
Right? I mean, I think it's a totally different category. Because I think of human rights as something that stems from our sense of self, right? I'm willing to say that other animals that have this kind of sense of self should be thought of as possessing a kind of dignity, right? And it's our dignity that means we have rights. So I go so far as to say that we could have dolphin rights and chimpanzee rights. But I don't think people would say that dogs have rights in the same way that dolphins or humans have rights.
Well, I think you'd find a lot of people that would argue that, but maybe they're a bit close to dogs.
But on a basis they couldn't defend, right? I like dogs. Yeah, and that's fine, right? I like dogs. So I think they should be treated a certain way, right? But I don't. But here's the thing: if we manage to learn how to communicate with dolphins, I think they could make a claim.
Right.
That's the difference, right? And I mean, I think that's for some people that sounds like a crazy thing to say, but I don't think so, right? I mean, we know that they communicate with each other in a sophisticated way. We know they think about themselves, and there's no reason to think that if they understood what we were talking about, that they wouldn't say, I want this, right? I need this.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I think that's exhausted my animal hero conversation.
Okay, but I do think that it gets us into a good place, right? Because what it's doing is this is sharpening what we think about heroism, and that's important because obviously you're in the midst of putting the finishing touches now on this first major conference on heroism, where people are going to come together and discuss and disagree about what heroism means, and I think it's really important for us. To think critically about what we mean by heroism, not just because it helps you in your day-to-day work on when people ask you what you're doing and why, but also because I just think it's so lazy if we don't, right? And I think that the stakes are actually higher than people want to believe. If we're not willing to make a case that something is different when you do X or Y, I think that we're sort of narrowing our ability to make a difference in some sense, right? Because then anything that people do, they can say is heroic, and that could also mean doing nothing if they wanted to.
Yeah. Well, right, and it renders the word meaningless, really, at a certain point. Why do we even use the word if it means anything and everything or anything to anyone?
Right.
But it's an interesting. I had the conversation last night with someone who's very excited about the conference. He works and has really arranged the title sponsorship, and after talking with him for 5 or 6 weeks, he said last night, what is the definition of a hero? because he's really taking this on, and particularly the bystander piece. He's reacting to people who are choosing to ignore issues or things that are going on when they, to keep themselves safe or whatever it might be. So this is someone who's engaged, has watched. He was searching. He was on the speakers page for the website the last 2 nights running, Googling all the speakers and watching what they've got to say and reading what they've got to say, and he still had to ask the question, what is a hero?
Right.
And I think that says a lot. And I think it's an important thing to come to get people interested in the conference. So and I struggled to give him a brief definition. There were a lot of caveats, a lot of examples, and that's not good enough. I think we need, even, Phil Zimbardo and Zeno Franco's definition is that they put out in the Lucifer Effect and the Banality of Heroism article. It's too big. There's too much to it. So we need some work on that. And we can go a whole show just talking about whether dogs, whether animals can be heroic. There's too much. So I do think it's vital to have a definition. Otherwise, it's a meaningless word. But I'm concerned that we haven't yet got something that's quite small and precise.
Yeah. Well, part of my thinking on this topic, of course, is both to make it more precise, but also not make it so small. And maybe that helps and maybe it doesn't, but that's the way I've been thinking about it for 5 years or whatever in working on this book. What I want to suggest is there are separate kinds of heroism, and each kind of heroism has a small, precise definition.
Yeah.
Right. The problem that we run into is when we don't recognize distinct categories. Right. So we make category mistakes.
Yeah.
And that leads us to try to keep expanding a single definition of heroism so that we can fit everything in, rather than saying, well, this is this type and this is that type. They all are different, right? There are things that are held in common across the types of heroism. Yeah, embracing one's mortality, for example, dedication to a principle, for example. But the actions themselves are very, very different, right? Nobody looks at a guy who rescues 100 children during the Holocaust and says, this is like the best warrior that we can think of. Right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean the warrior isn't a hero. It just means he's a different kind of hero. And if you looked carefully, you would see there are similarities between the rescuer and the fighter, but they're not entirely similar. Right? There are clear distinctions that leads one person to be heroic in terms of battlefield excellence, and another heroic in a life-saving way. And I think. Our big mistake is when we try to just keep expanding a single definition of heroism to include everything that impresses people, right? Instead, we can say, these people are icons or these people are role models because they don't fit into a definition, any definition of heroism, right? They don't sacrifice. They don't. There's no question that they might be putting their life on the line. There's no principle here. They're just singing, right? They're very good singers, but they're just singing. So call them something else, right?
Yeah.
Leave heroism to the heroes.
Yeah.
And be willing to say, here's one kind of heroism, here's another kind of. That's my talk right there, Matt. That's my lecture. I think I'm going to call it "Leave Heroism to the Heroes," because I feel very, very strongly about this. I'm not trying to say to people, your heroes are wrong. Don't have them as heroes. I'm trying to say, call them something else. right? You should love them and admire them just as you always did, but they're not heroes. They're role models. They're something else. That doesn't make them worse. It doesn't take away from how you feel. It's just leaving heroism for the heroes.
I think that's a great place to end. Because I think our next episode could be really going through the different types and stringing that common thread, and stealing the thunder from your talk at the Hero Roundtable.
Let's do. Yeah, no, that's great. And and since we'll be recording it, I don't even have to come to the conference. I can just press play from home, and we'll all save a little bit of money. No, this is really helpful, and I think that doing that next week will in fact help me as well, because as you know, I mean, all I've done is look at classical archetypes, right? So I have 3 classical archetypes, and not everything may fit into those. So it may be the case that there's a 4th or a 5th, which is fine, right? I don't want to say that someone who does something that's clearly heroic shouldn't count because they don't fit into my schema. Right? That's not it at all. It's about figuring out what the best version of that will look like. And
so I think so I think something we could look at next week is bringing some examples with us to the table, and maybe speakers could readers and viewers and listeners could send us some examples that they'd like to hear about, and we can nail down what's heroic about some of these people, and maybe nail down what's why they don't fit into any of the hero types.
Yeah, that's right. Who should we consider as a hero? And then we'll tell you if they fit or they don't, or if they cause us to create a new category that a whole bunch of other people will then fit into. Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Let's do that. Send us your thoughts, your heroes, your tired, huddled, heroic masses.
I will. I'll bring File App, and I'm going to send you an extended trailer of the movie via Facebook any minute now.
I'm enthusiastic about it, and I can't wait. Please send me the list of American horses that features a non-American horse.
I will.
So that I can write to the curator of that list about how he's done everyone in the world a disservice. Matt, thanks. This has been fun. I'm going to go drink more coffee now and think about Far Lap.
Good. Get ready. It's about 10 minutes, and I think you'll be a changed man.
Couldn't it be any faster? It was such a fast horse.
Well, you'll see. He's fast.
Yeah. All right. Terrific. Have a good one, Matt. I'll write to you soon.
See ya.
See ya.